The police officer left with a bemused shake of his head, but the damage was done. The festive atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by an uncomfortable tension that made the evening air feel thick and oppressive. Neighbors gathered their children and began folding up chairs, their voices hushed and careful. Karen found herself standing alone on her porch, watching her community dissolve before her eyes. Jessica was helping Emma retrieve balloons that had come loose, while David, when had he arrived, spoke quietly with Tom Henderson near the street. Grandma looked sad. She heard Emma say to Jessica, her voice carrying in the evening quiet. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, sweetheart," Jessica replied. "Even grandmas." The words cut deeper than any violation notice Karen had ever written. She descended the porch steps slowly, her legs feeling unsteady. Most of the neighbors had already gone inside, but a few lingered. Brenda, the Chens, the Hendersons, the Pattles. They watched her approach with expressions ranging from disappointment to pity. "Jessica," Karen said, her voice barely above a whisper. Could we talk?" Jessica looked up from where she was kneeling beside Emma. "I think we need to." They sat on Karen's porch swing, the same swing where Karen used to read bedtime stories to Jessica 20 years ago. Emma had fallen asleep in David's arms, exhausted by the excitement and confusion of the evening. "I didn't know about her," Karen said finally. "About Emma." "I know." Jessica's voice was tired. "I wanted to tell you when I was pregnant. I picked up the phone a dozen times." "Why didn't you?" Jessica was quiet for a long moment. "Because I was afraid you'd find something wrong with how I was doing it. My apartment was too small. My job wasn't stable enough. David and I weren't married yet. I couldn't handle another lecture about my life choices." Karen felt something crumble inside her chest. "I never meant to make you feel that way." "Didn't you?" Jessica turned to face her. "Mom, when was the last time you said something positive about my life? When was the last time you asked how I was feeling instead of telling me what I was doing wrong?" Karen opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She couldn't remember. Every conversation had become a critique, every visit a performance review. Even her praise came wrapped in suggestions for improvement. "I was trying to help," she said weakly. "Were you helping when you called the police on people who were trying to celebrate you?" Karen looked out at her yard, where a few stubborn balloons still bobbed in the breeze. "I was protecting the neighborhood standards, property values, order." "Whose order?" Jessica's voice was sharp now. "Yours. Mom, I drove through this neighborhood tonight, and do you know what I saw? Pristine lawns, identical mailboxes, houses that look like they came from a catalog. But I didn't see any kids playing in yards. I didn't see neighbors talking over fences. I saw a beautiful, empty museum where people happened to sleep." "That's not true," Karen protested. "We have community events. The annual garage sale, the holiday decorating contest, events you organize and judge." Jessica interrupted. "Mom, when was the last time you were invited to someone's birthday party? When was the last time a neighbor called you just to chat?" Karen's mouth went dry. The truth was, she couldn't remember. Her phone calls were all business. Violation notices, committee meetings, complaints about barking dogs or unauthorized paint colors. Her social interactions were formal, official, transactional. "The rules matter," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Without standards, everything falls apart." The child, Emma, looked up at Karen with curious eyes. "Are you the birthday lady? Daddy said you might have cake." Karen's vision blurred. Granddaughter. She had a granddaughter, and she was just now meeting her. 4 years old, which meant Jessica had been pregnant during their last fight. Pregnant and alone, and too proud or too hurt to tell her own mother. Karen looked around at her neighbors, at the police officer, at the balloons bobbing in the evening breeze. "I don't understand." "We wanted to surprise you," Brenda said gently. "Jessica reached out to me a few weeks ago. She said you'd been alone since the divorce, and she was worried about you but didn't know how to rebuild the bridge. When I suggested a neighborhood party, she thought it might be a good way to soften things." Karen's hands were shaking. But the Facebook post, the birthday confusion. "I may have fudged the truth a little," Brenda admitted. I told everyone it was your birthday so they'd participate, and Jessica helped me coordinate everything. The balloons, the food, getting everyone together. We just wanted to see you smile. Officer Martinez cleared his throat. Ma'am, about the permit violation. Karen looked at him, then at her neighbors, then at her daughter and granddaughter. The little girl had picked up a fallen balloon and was examining it with the intense concentration only children could manage. Karen's voice caught. I'd like to withdraw my complaint. Look around, Mom. Jessica gestured to the quiet street. You've enforced your standards for 20 years. Has it made you happy? Has it made anyone happy? Karen stared at her hands, noticing for the first time how pale they were, how the veins showed through the skin like a roadmap of isolation. I thought if I could just keep everything perfect, everything would be okay. After your father left, after you stopped calling, I needed something I could control. But you can't control people, Mom. You can't force them to live the way you think they should. I know that now, Karen whispered, but I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to take back 20 years of being the neighborhood villain. Jessica was quiet for a moment. Maybe you start by taking down the balloons yourself. Maybe you thank people for thinking of you. Maybe you apologize. Karen looked up at her daughter, seeing her clearly for the first time in years. Jessica had become a woman while Karen wasn't paying attention. Strong, confident, compassionate. A good mother to a little girl who might never know her grandmother because of Karen's stubborn pride. I don't know if they'll forgive me, Karen said. I don't know either, Jessica admitted. But Mom, you've spent so much energy making sure everyone follows the rules. Maybe it's time to learn what it means to be neighbors. Karen watched her granddaughter's animated face and felt something shift inside her chest. For years, she'd been so focused on keeping things in line that she'd forgotten to notice what was beautiful about the chaos. Emma's small hands working to untangle the ribbons, her serious expression as she examined each balloon, her delighted giggle when one bounced against her nose. These were the moments that mattered. Karen, Brenda said quietly, I want you to know that yesterday wasn't just about throwing you a party. We were hoping that maybe if we showed you some kindness, you might remember that we're all just trying to make our little corner of the world feel like home. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand, Karen said. I'm sorry I made you feel like enemies instead of neighbors. We're not enemies, Tom Henderson said, his voice gruff but not unkind. We're just people trying to live our lives. Sometimes those lives get messy. Sometimes they don't fit into neat little boxes. Karen nodded, understanding flooding through her. All those violation notices, all those rigid rules. She'd been trying to force life into the neat little boxes that made her feel safe and in control. But life wasn't meant to be contained. It was meant to be lived, messily and imperfectly and together. Next Saturday, she said, looking around at her neighbors' faces. Block party. No rules except be kind to each other. What about the permit? Brenda asked with a slight smile. Already applied for it this morning, Karen said. Turns out the city office opens at 6 a.m. The crowd began to disperse, but the energy felt different now, lighter, more hopeful. Karen stood in her yard, surrounded by balloons and possibility, watching her granddaughter chase a butterfly between the flowers she'd never allowed herself to notice before. But as the neighbors headed back to their homes, Karen caught sight of a familiar car parked at the end of the street. A black sedan with tinted windows that had been there for the past 3 mornings. She'd assumed it was someone visiting, but now she wasn't so sure. The driver's window rolled down slightly, and Karen glimpsed a figure inside taking photographs of her house, of her, of the balloons and the gathering crowd. Her blood chilled. After 23 years of rigid rule enforcement, she'd made enemies beyond her immediate neighborhood. Other HOAs had tried to recruit her as a consultant. Property management companies had offered her jobs. She'd always declined, preferring to focus on her own community. But what if someone else was now documenting her moment of weakness? What if her newfound flexibility was being photographed as evidence of her failure to maintain standards? The sedan's engine started, and it pulled away slowly, leaving Karen with a creeping sense of unease. She'd made a choice to change, to be better, to rebuild bridges with her community. But in a world where property values and community standards were big business, Was she naive to think that choice would come without consequences? Emma tugged on her sleeve. "Grandma, why do you look scared?" Karen forced a smile and knelt down to her granddaughter's level. "I'm not scared, sweetheart. I'm just thinking about the future." But as she helped Emma arrange the balloons in rainbow order, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that her past wasn't quite ready to let her go. The question was, would her newfound community stand with her when that past came calling? Karen spent the next 3 hours conducting what she called tactical reconnaissance. Armed with her tablet, a measuring tape, and her grandmother's opera glasses, she documented every balloon, every ribbon, every potential HOA violation scattered across her lawn. Exhibit A, she whispered into her phone's voice recorder, unauthorized placement of decorative materials exceeding the community-approved color palette. She zoomed in on a particularly offensive neon green balloon. Exhibit B, potential damage to heritage landscaping. Her doorbell chimed. Through the peephole, she saw Brenda Martinez holding a covered casserole dish, her face glowing with that insufferable neighborly warmth that Karen had always found suspicious. "Karen, honey." Brenda beamed as Karen reluctantly opened the door. "I brought you my famous enchilada casserole for tonight's party. I hope you don't mind, but I used your birthday as an excuse to finally get everyone together. This neighborhood's been so divided lately." Divided? Karen's voice was sharp as broken glass. Brenda's smile faltered slightly. "Well, you know, ever since the incident with the Hendersons' garden gnomes, and the whole situation with the Patels' prayer flags, people have been tense." Karen remembered both incidents vividly. She'd personally written the violation notices. The Hendersons' gnomes exceeded the maximum height for lawn ornaments by 3 inches. The Patels' colorful prayer flags violated the community's neutral earth tone exterior decoration policy. Those were legitimate policy violations, Karen said stiffly. "Of course they were, legally speaking," Brenda said carefully. "But Karen, we're neighbors. We're supposed to look out for each other, not?" She trailed off, her eyes drifting to the tablet in Karen's hand, where photos of balloons filled the screen. "Not what?" Karen's voice was dangerously quiet. "Not make each other miserable over technicalities." The words hit Karen like a slap. She'd built her entire identity around those technicalities. They weren't just rules. They were the thin line between civilization and chaos. Without standards, without order, neighborhoods became wastelands of pink flamingos and basketball hoops permanently attached to garages. "I need to make some calls," Karen said, already closing the door. "Karen, wait." But the door was already shut, leaving Brenda standing on the porch with her casserole and her hurt expression. Karen leaned against the door, breathing heavily. Through her blinds, she could see more neighbors gathering on their porches, pointing at her house and laughing. Laughing at her. She opened her laptop and began typing furiously. If she couldn't report the decorations as violations, she'd find another way. Every homeowner in Willowbrook Estates had signed a detailed contract when they moved in. Somewhere in that legal maze, there had to be something she could use. 2 hours later, she found it. Buried in subsection 47C of the Community Noise Ordinance. Gatherings exceeding 15 people require HOA approval, and a permit application submitted no less than 72 hours in advance. Karen's smile was razor-thin. According to her count, at least 28 neighbors had already confirmed attendance for tonight's party via the neighborhood group chat she'd been monitoring. She reached for her phone to call the police about the unpermitted gathering, but her finger hesitated over the screen. Through her window, she could see Mr. Peterson from next door helping his elderly mother up his front steps. Mrs. Chen was watering her roses while her grandson drew chalk pictures on the sidewalk. The Johnsons' teenage daughter was walking their ancient golden retriever, stopping to let the dog sniff every balloon with obvious delight. For a moment, something twisted in Karen's chest. When was the last time she'd seen this many neighbors outside, talking to each other, smiling? Then she remembered the laughter, the pointing, the pity in Brenda's eyes when she'd called Karen's life's work technicalities. Karen dialed the non-emergency police line. "I need to report an unpermitted gathering," she said, her voice steady as stone. By 5:30 p.m., Karen's front yard looked like a small festival. Neighbors had brought folding chairs, card tables, and enough food to feed a small army. Children ran between the balloons while adults clustered in groups, their conversations punctuated by laughter that made Karen's teeth ache. She watched from her kitchen window, dressed in her most formal business attire, a charcoal gray suit that made her look like she was attending a funeral rather than a party. Which, in a way, she was. This would be the funeral of her neighborhood's last shred of order and dignity. At exactly 6:00 p.m., a police cruiser pulled into her driveway. Officer Martinez, no relation to Brenda, Karen had checked, stepped out of his car, and surveyed the scene with the weary expression of a man who dealt with HOA disputes before. He was younger than Karen had expected, probably late 20s, with kind eyes that reminded her uncomfortably of her son-in-law David. "Ma'am," he said, approaching her front door. "We received a call about an unpermitted gathering." Karen stepped onto her porch, her heels clicking against the concrete. The conversations around her yard gradually died as neighbors noticed the police presence. Children stopped running, instinctively moving closer to their parents. "That's correct," Officer Karen said, her voice carrying clearly across the sudden silence. "According to Willowbrook Estates HOA regulations, any gathering exceeding 15 people requires advance approval and a permit. This event violates multiple community standards." Brenda Martinez pushed through the crowd, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Karen, what have you done?" "I've enforced the rules that everyone agreed to follow when they moved here," Karen replied, not taking her eyes off the officer. "Rules that protect our property values and maintain community standards. You called the police on your own birthday party." This from Tom Henderson, the garden gnome owner, his voice incredulous. "It's not my birthday," Karen said flatly, "and it's not my party." Officer Martinez looked confused. "Ma'am, if it's not your party, and it's on your property, couldn't you just ask them to leave?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She hadn't considered that angle. The point is the principle. Rules exist for a reason." "The principle?" Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her usually gentle voice shaking with anger. "The principle is that we tried to do something nice for you, Karen. We thought maybe if we showed you some kindness, you might remember what it's like to be human." "Human?" Karen's voice cracked. "I'm the only one here who cares about maintaining standards. Do you know what this neighborhood would look like without rules? Without someone willing to enforce them? Like a place where people actually want to live?" This from Jessica's voice, cutting through the crowd like a knife. Karen turned, her heart stopping. There, standing at the edge of her driveway, was her daughter. Jessica looked older than Karen remembered, her long brown hair now shoulder length, her face thinner but somehow stronger. She was holding the hand of a little girl Karen had never seen before, a child with Jessica's eyes and David's stubborn chin. "Jessica." Karen's voice was barely a whisper. "Hello, Mom." Jessica's voice was carefully neutral. "I thought Brenda's message about the party. I thought maybe it was time we talked." Karen's world tilted sideways. You're here. You brought." She stared at the little girl, who couldn't be more than 4 years old. "Is that your granddaughter?" Jessica said quietly. "Emma. She's been asking about her grandmother." Karen Pemberton's perfectly manicured finger froze mid-dial as she peered through her kitchen blinds. Her immaculate Tudor-style home, the crown jewel of Willowbrook Estates, was drowning in a sea of rainbow balloons. Not just a few balloons, hundreds of them, bobbing like colorful tumors across her pristine lawn, wrapped around her imported Japanese maple, and, dear God, tied to her vintage wrought iron mailbox. "What in the Sam Hill?" she whispered, her voice cracking like old leather. The phone in her hand buzzed. Text message from her neighbor, Brenda Martinez. "Happy birthday, Karen. Hope you love the surprise." The whole block chipped in. Karen's eye twitched. Today wasn't her birthday. Her birthday was October 15th, 3 months away. But apparently, her gossipy neighbors had confused her with someone else and decided to turn her property into a circus. She yanked open her front door, marching onto her porch in her silk robe and fuzzy slippers. The morning air carried the sound of children giggling somewhere nearby, probably delighted by the rainbow invasion of her carefully curated landscape. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she shrieked to no one in particular, her voice echoing through the quiet subdivision. Mrs. Chen, from across the street, emerged from behind her rose bushes, pruning shears in hand. "Oh good, you're awake. We were worried we'd wake you too early. Brenda organized everything after she saw your birthday on Facebook." "Facebook?" Karen's voice rose an octave. "I don't even have Facebook." "Your daughter posted about it," Mrs. Chen said cheerfully. "Said you've been feeling lonely since your divorce and could use some community love." Karen's blood turned to ice water. Jessica, her estranged daughter who hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. Not since the infamous Thanksgiving incident involving Karen's critique of Jessica's bohemian lifestyle and questionable career choices. A red pickup truck rumbled down the street, slowing as it passed her house. The driver, some teenager with too much hair and too little respect, leaned out the window. "Yo, birthday lady. Sick party setup." Karen's hands clenched into fists. This was war. She spun around and marched back inside, slamming the door hard enough to rattle her collection of crystal bells. Her phone was already in her hand, fingers flying across the screen as she opened the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association app. "Emergency violation report," she muttered, typing furiously. "Unauthorized decorations, noise disturbance, destruction of community aesthetic standards." But as she scrolled through the HOA bylaws, her stomach dropped. The decorations were on her property. She couldn't report herself, and as HOA president, she'd have to publicly address this disaster at tonight's monthly meeting. Karen sank into her leather armchair, staring at the riot of color outside her window. 23 years she'd lived in this neighborhood, 23 years of maintaining standards, enforcing rules, keeping property values high. And now she looked like the neighborhood fool. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Brenda. "We're having a block party at 6 p.m. Can't wait to celebrate with you." Karen's jaw tightened. If they wanted a party, she'd give them one they'd never forget. Karen woke before dawn, her mind churning with plans. She dressed quickly and slipped outside, where the morning air was cool and fresh. The balloons were still there, looking somehow different in the gray light, less like an invasion and more like a gift she'd been too blind to see. She began untying them one by one, but instead of throwing them away, she arranged them in careful clusters around her yard. The neon green balloon that had offended her so much yesterday now seemed cheerful, almost brave in its brightness. By the time her neighbors began emerging for their morning routines, Karen had transformed the chaotic scatter of balloons into an artful display that somehow made her austere yard look welcoming for the first time in years. "Karen." Brenda Martinez appeared at her fence line, coffee mug in hand. "What are you doing?" "Learning," Karen said simply. "Brenda, I owe you an apology, all of you. What you did yesterday was kind, and I responded with cruelty." Brenda's eyebrows rose. "Karen, are you feeling all right?" "No," Karen said, laughing despite herself. "I'm not. I've been not all right for a very long time, and I've been making everyone else miserable because of it." Mrs. Chen emerged from her house, followed by Tom Henderson and his wife. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood grapevine, and within an hour, a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, watching Karen Pemberton, who something unprecedented, admit she was wrong. "I know you all think I'm the neighborhood witch," Karen said, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "And you're right. I've been so focused on rules and regulations that I forgot why we have neighborhoods in the first place. It's not about property values or perfect lawns. It's about community. It's about looking out for each other." "Does this mean you're resigning from the HOA?" Tom Henderson asked, his voice cautious but hopeful. Karen considered this. "No, but I'm going to change how I do the job. Instead of looking for violations, maybe I should start looking for ways to bring people together. Maybe I should ask what you need instead of telling you what you're doing wrong." "What about the gnomes?" Tom pressed. "And the prayer flags?" Karen took a deep breath. "I'm proposing we revise the community standards. Make them more flexible, more human." The crowd murmured among themselves, skeptical but intrigued. Karen didn't blame them. She'd built her reputation on inflexibility and rigid enforcement. Trust would take time to rebuild. "There's something else," Karen said. "I'd like to host a real block party. A proper one, with permits and everything. Next Saturday, if you're interested." "What's the occasion?" Mrs. Chen asked. Karen smiled, and for the first time in years it felt genuine. "My granddaughter's first visit to the neighborhood. I'd like her to see what a real community looks like." Jessica appeared at Karen's elbow, Emma's hand clasped in hers. "Is that okay with you?" Karen asked her daughter quietly. "It's a start," Jessica said, but her voice was warm. "Emma, do you want to help Grandma with the balloons?" Emma nodded eagerly and ran to where a cluster of silver balloons had tangled themselves around the mailbox. As she worked to free them, she chatted about colors and shapes and how balloons could fly if you let them go. But it was better to keep them because then everyone could see how pretty they were.